So in this example that we were given, we discussed the differences between Moses and how he is depicted in the Bible versus the Quran. And the verses in Exodus are chapter 2, verse 1 through 10, chapter 3, and chapter 4, verse 1 through 14. And for the Quran, it is chapter 20, verses 9 through 76.
So let's then begin at the very beginning, a very good place to start in these two. As we look towards the Quran and the Bible, there's some very fundamental differences with where they begin. So in terms of Exodus, the Bible begins with the story of Moses' birth and obviously his movement down the rivers, being outcast by his original mother and eventual finding of him by the Pharaoh's daughter. Whereas in the Quran, it jumps right into the burning bush, and all that's mentioned of this birth that takes nearly a whole chapter in the Bible is talked about by God, recounting what was going on with this heroic birth. One interesting piece, especially to note within these stories, is that in the Bible they talk about him being put down the river in this basket that carries connotations of things in the New Testament. We'll see the basket being the source of bread, the bread of life, specifically Jesus. So it's possibly some foreshadowing to that. Whereas in the Quran you see it referred to as right here as a chest that is dark, rigid, slightly death-like, that carries negative connotations. And the picture here looks positive and flowery, but in the Quran they refer to it as the enemy, and more so in the abstract, which Don is going to talk about right here.
Yeah, so what is important is we look at these differences of the word choice that's used, and we see the basket versus the chest. And another things we see is how they reference who was the one who discovered Moses in this basket or chest in the Nile River. And in the Bible, they use the term, they have daughters Pharaoh who discovers it. In the Quran, they say the enemy discovers it. So it's really interesting because you look at the differences and you see, well, one, with the Bible, it's more friendly. It looks more open, more inviting, more personal. While in the Quran, it's the enemy. It's something, it's like bad, it's cynical, it's deadly. You know, these are the people that are against Moses, against the Jewish people, and against the Israelites. So it's really interesting when you see the connotations that they infer, the different things that they try to imply.
And we're honestly not sure as to the necessary meaning for it. Obviously, as we look towards the Bible, it would even make sense possibly if there were a darker theme because Jesus is the fulfillment of the light. But I think it's important to show that even in this dark moment, the Bible is emphasizing that there's light, that there are positives to come from it, whereas the Quran takes a different look at it, that it's negative, and then they're looking to positive, whereas the Bible is looking to find positives in all things. Mm-hmm. So once we've laid the groundwork for the piece, and as the Quran does, we're going to dive right into the burning bush. And one thing you'll notice from this photo here to the right is the way Moses is shielding his eyes from the burning bush to the left. And that's common in most depictions because it was considered dangerous or out of the way to look at God and could be quite frightful. There are a number of similarities between the passages of the burning bushes in these two texts right here. In both of them, Moses is commanded to take off his shoes, which you notice at the bottom of this frame right here. His sandals are off his feet. Another interesting thing that takes place in both is the miracles that God performs in Moses' presence. So the staff to his left is turned into a serpent, and his hand right here is placed inside and is turned with scales to show leprosy, which obviously was highly stigmatized at the time. And finally, one interesting thing is Moses questioning God in both pieces. This is a theme in whatever religious text you look at. It's this constant struggle to accept God's plan, and ultimately Moses accepts it in both of them and trusts in God's confidence. But there are some differences, and Don's going to touch upon one of the interesting differences.
So when we look at how Moses approaches the bush, it's actually very interesting to see the differences because in Exodus, Moses has curiosity when he sees the bush. He sees this bush burning and he's wondering why is it not burning up. He approaches it and he tries to figure out what's going on. While in the Quran, Moses is talking with more of a stoic voice. He's saying, "This bush is burning. I will use its light and use its fire for other purposes." He's talking with his family, and it's less personal. It's less you can feel less emotion in the words that he's using there.
And that's one general note we've made from looking at these two texts. The Bible, it's typically very clear to see who's speaking. It's very fluid. The sentences feel very lifelike, whereas the Quran feels just kind of rigid, almost as though the sentences were pieced in piece by piece into the text. So one interesting thing to note with that one as well.
So now that we've looked at some differences, we can see a lot of similarities between the passages, and one of them is how Aaron is assisting Moses in helping reveal the word of God, helping reveal God's presence to the Egyptians. And basically, the idea behind this was that Moses had trouble speaking, and this goes back to a story where some sources say that Moses had burned his tongue from touching a piece of coal to his mouth. So the end result is that basically he has trouble speaking, and he has Aaron, his brother, do the speaking for him. And this is actually really interesting when you look at it with why would God choose someone who has trouble speaking to spread the word of God? And me and Adam, we believe that this goes back to the idea of the Anawim, which is the lowliest of life, helping and revealing the truth of God, and the lowliest representing the greatness of Him. And so what we see as well is how Aaron is almost like a successor to Moses. And when Moses leaves during the 40 days, when he leaves for the 40 days, Aaron actually takes over. So we were thinking maybe this is what the Shia Muslims use as justification for the family bloodline taking over Muhammad. Aaron takes over his brother Moses, Muhammad's family takes over him.
So finally, before we wrap things up, we're going to note just a few things about where our passages conclude. The selected passages given to us, specifically chapter 4, verses 1 through 14 in Exodus, conclude right before Moses goes to the Pharaoh, whereas our Quran piece that goes to verse 76 in chapter 20 actually looks at how Moses is received by the Pharaoh and the other Egyptian people. So we're not going to really touch upon those passages there because there's nothing to compare the Quran to in our selected passages. But please note that there are a lot of differences there and also some similarities as well. So here, as we look up above at these two WordPress images of both the Quran over on the right and the Bible over on the left. So hopefully some things that stick out to you. Obviously, the shapes of them should be the first thing. We've got the fire to represent the burning bush in the Quran piece on the right, and the snake that the staff was transformed to on the left. So first, looking at the Bible, specifically this Exodus passage on the left, some words really stand out. This hand, this idea that Moses is the hand of God. And obviously, throughout history, throughout the Old Testament, you're going to see constantly that God is extending himself through the works of others, that hand is a very powerful component in doing his work. You'll also notice a lot of mentions to, say, Abraham here, to Isaac, to Jacob over here. This idea that the lineage is important, this passing down of the law. You see Egypt and Egyptians and people, because here in Exodus, they talk a lot about the chosen people, and that's one thing that's very interesting in the way the Quran and the Bible differ. You see that in Exodus, the chosen people are often who are referred to as the Israelites. But in the Quran, it's a little bit different. In the Quran, you see that it's not the chosen people, it's the people of Israel. And one possible explanation that Don and I both come to the conclusion to is that they don't want to legitimize that these Jewish people are the chosen people of God, because obviously those following the Muslim faith, the Islamic faith, the Muslims want to believe that their faith is the justified one and that is their true calling. So it's not the chosen people, it's rather the Israelites in the Quran. And obviously the biggest piece that sticks out is will in the Quran on the right and God's running down the top. And you do see Abraham too, so there are those references to the lineage, but not quite as heavily as the Bible. And obviously will sticks out even more so than hand does in this passage. So it's will, your will be done, I will do this for you, and that sort of thing. So as we come to this conclusion of our passage, we look towards the Bible and the Quran as a number of differences, a number of similarities, both with theological implications.